Welcome to the Sanctum Secorum podcast, where we plumb the depths of Appendix N as it pertains to the Dungeon Crawl Classics role-playing game. We're back, and we are here to help you serve these literary offerings at your DCC RPG table. I'm Keeper Marc, and with me tonight is Keeper Bob.
Hey, everybody.
And Keeper Jen.
Good evening.
Good evening. Tonight, exciting, we delve into the works of the Queen of Space Opera, Leigh Brackett, as we discuss The Hounds of Skaith. Jen, do you want to start us off with a synopsis?
Sure. In the second volume of Leigh Brackett's exemplary trilogy, The Book of Skaith, Eric John Stark, having expelled the Lord's Protector from their northern citadel and released his friend and mentor, Galactic Ambassador Ashton, heads south to find the wise woman Gareth in her to foment rebellion, and in spite of the Wandsman and the Lord's Protector's wishes, to open the dying planet to star travel. Although he's outnumbered, he possesses one extraordinary advantage. He now holds mental mastery over the Hounds of Skaith, fierce mutant beasts that paralyze their enemies by the power of fear alone. Yeah, this was cool.
I mean, it's Leigh Brackett, right? You cannot go wrong with Leigh Brackett.
I didn't feel like I had to go back and read the first book. They actually gave us this last time on, and it was nice and encapsulated, and every now and then would refer back to something that would be, I guess, what you'd consider like a running gag or running joke throughout the series. But I don't feel like I missed a whole lot by not reading the first book first.
No, well, because like any good serialized program, it starts with previously on. And that's the thing, right? I mean, Leigh Brackett was born in 1915. So, around the time, that she started writing, we were starting to see serialized films and shorts, and so that just makes perfect sense. And she did not have it easy growing up. I mean, she lost her father in the 1918 flu epidemic. But she was introduced to burrows, which sort of, because I look at this and I'm like, wow, this is like John Carter of Mars, but much better. And
wow.
And also much later, right?
It really is. I mean, the John Carter books, the first one's really good. The second one's okay, it's good. The third one is fair. The fifth one is essentially the first one, except now it's his son. And so they just sort of repeat. This is it just punches and doesn't let go.
Yeah, and Jen, you said that you didn't have to read the first one, but I want to read the first one and the third one after reading this one. It was so compelling. I jumping in the middle was kind of fun because we have like all that framework and build up already completed, and he's got this really cool story now. This really cool, like, sort of taking vengeance back against the uprising against the Wandsman and all the people.
He already succeeded through the funnel. So we start in media res as he's leveled up.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. Not only did we start with book 2 of this series, there's like 5 or 6 novellas with him that come first, right?
Oh, wow.
Yes. He was like her big recurring character. And his last appearance was in a posthumously published collaboration with her husband, Edmund Hamilton. And that was Stark and the Star Kings. That combined, her Eric Stark and his Star Kings. And that came out in 2005. To put it in perspective, she died in 1978. Mm-hmm. And he died before she did. So it obviously sat around for a while before coming out. But yeah, he's just such a neat character.
Now, there's some comments in the Twitch chatter about the world building being fantastic, especially in the first one. And I get the feeling that I might have been a little more bored during the first one because I'm not an avid reader of strategy and wartime stuff. So I feel like this was a good happy medium in the scheme of that.
Well, I mean, her world building is always pretty solid, right? I mean, and I don't think it gets overly drawn out. I mean, when we read the Priestess of the Mad Moon back in like
Oh.
Sanctum 16. One of the comments was, this says a lot without saying a lot. Um, she's not she doesn't have Vance's brevity with descriptions, but she's certainly not as verbose in her descriptions as Michael Moorcock. She's still a little on the sparse side. So, her world building is generally a quick explanation of what's going on when it's needed and not before.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also, I found it really interesting. Like, she does do a lot of like sort of, I think the comparison to Vance is interesting because, there's a lot of sort of like throwaway things, but they're very enriching, right? Just in terms of like, what material is sort of like behind that. And until I read the full series, it's hard to know like how much of that is expanded on the other books. But in this book, at least, that kind of brevity of some of the civilizations or cultures are really neat. Like there was like one part when, at the beginning of the books when Stark is, facing those underground, daughters of the Skaith mother, and when the two sons, Fen and Fenric, I think, are the ones that she sends to go and hunt Stark. And that doesn't take a major plot point, but it's like it's there, and they have to cut their fingers off in order to have a part of their bodies preserved so that they are, they can be sanctified in the ground, of their homeland. And that's just like a throwaway thing. It's like, oh yeah, before you go, cut your fingers off, make sure that they're buried so that when you don't come back, you at least have some consecrated space. And it never comes up again.
It had been so long since anyone had been forced to leave the sacred house in those circumstances that the officiating diviner had difficulty in finding the proper scrolls for the ritual. I love that part.
So I mean, there's a lot of that, like
parts like that. Yeah, Marc, I immediately thought of you on a lot of these points where I'm like, oh yeah, he's gonna pull that one.
The other scenes that were really engrossing were the pilgrimage when Stark is like in disguise and trying to, push his way through the crowds, and it's all these sort of like minute scenes of like there's a dancing pilgrim and there's a prophesizer and there's lasciviousness going on, but it's just all captured really well and just this very short clarification points, and it's really neat.
I would go so far to say is there are heavy theocratic overtones in this particular book, if not the whole series.
Well, and it's real interesting because this was published in 1974, and the whole concept of this world almost seems like a rebuke of the 1960s counterculture movement, right? I mean, we've got this world where it's okay, our resources are limited, so everybody needs to be fed, everybody needs to be housed, everyone needs to be taken care of. And so you people can meet all of those needs. So you do that. Everyone else, the world is dying. Just go out and enjoy what's left of the world. And it leads to a lot of resentment and bitterness and anger. I'm reading this going, wow, this conversation feels really, really modern. I think I've heard this before on the news channels.
Oh, it is absolutely allegorical. I mean, global warming. We cannot heal Mother Skaith, but there's still those who believe that their temples and their sacred groves and their ivory cities will stand forever because nothing will ever happen to them.
And the people that are ruling are just going to keep doing what they're doing because they're still in power, and that's what matters to them.
Yeah, they sort of ignored the evidence around them.
Yeah.
She knew things we didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, all of Skaith is this world in decline. I mean, the climate change, the dwindling resources, no population control. Because boy, the people out there having fun are out there having fun, including while on pilgrimages,
including not necessarily humans doing this.
Yeah.
There were what did they call them? Not cauldron. They were well created servants. So sidestep from that things, perhaps.
Yeah, there was a lot of the dying of the sun. They had some rituals that they perform every morning where they fed the sun wine and fire. All that is very much like you could imagine that being like a the dying earth sort of imbued, because it's like those idiosyncratic villagers or villages that you encounter, but this is like a whole world that's filled out with that. I think the first book, it's called the Ginger Star, right? Because of the coloration of its like aged, it's leaving its its lifespan. In Bob, when what I was reading when I was reading this was with the climate change overtones, my thoughts were kind of going back to in the culture at the time, the big sort of like movements were generated from like the Silent Spring or the population bomb, like these two very impactful books that started some of the conversations around environmentalism, things like that. But I also get your point about like the sort of autocracy and the counterculture sort of reaction, because I can imagine that too. I'd be curious like if there's some work that she's
like a deep dive into this.
Because I was thinking more of like this is sort of like the of the moment discussion of ecological irreparable damage that people can envision for the future kind of like coming to fruition. So
one of the quotes she uses she heard at the time, and that's the curse of all democracies is that they talk too much.
That's fair.
She had a number of like good sort of short quotes. Another one I think I was what invisibility was a condition of godhead, and that's that being like this sort of that their approach to power is you have to remain indecipherable, right, in the sense of unknowable.
And that led to when the pilgrims were presented with the Lord's protector in person, in the flesh, the crowds automatically disbelieved it. And the wandsmen played into it. They're like, oh yeah, see, we told you nothing could happen to those.
Oh my God, they literally came out and said fake news.
Yeah, exactly.
Biggest crowd of revelers ever.
And it's so God, Marc.
Sorry. I really didn't stop to think about that until you mentioned it, Jen. But yeah, they really did come out and say that.
It's so easy to avoid the truth if it's veiled in religion too. Even as Stark is trying to avoid a woman's attentions, he just pulls his hood down further and says, I've taken a vow. Just use the religion as you have to. But yeah, Marc, that pilgrimage, man, I keep thinking to a couple of particular modules, and the fact that Brackett likened it to a stream of humanity complete with the smells. It's just perfect.
Well, let's talk about Stark for a second, because it's interesting that no cover artist has ever accurately depicted Stark. Because while he is through, if you look at everything, he is certainly of European descent. He was born on Mercury, and because of the hot sun of Mercury, his skin is as black as his hair. And even though he was a dark-skinned European, they would not depict him as such on covers. And there was a lot of discussion about at the time and after about how Leigh Brackett was gently trying to push those borders a little bit on what would be acceptable in the mainstream.
I think he's also like called out specifically as he got scarred face from all those like battles and stuff like that. So I'm sure like the emphasis on the handsomeness and on the light skin became sort of like the push for the novel. Like the cover that I read, which is actually I love this art piece, the ones behind me.
Is that the Kindle version?
That's a newer version. I don't remember what edition it is, but it's
I dug that cover. Yeah.
I love that kind of battle scene, but it's a little darker skinned than the other ones, just in terms of but not compared to the descriptions. You're right.
And then he had almost like pale blue eyes, almost translucent. They were saying they were so pale in comparison to everything else and everyone else's eyes there. His eyes are actually what give him away during the pilgrimage.
Well, and Leigh Brackett openly admitted that Stark was a pastiche of Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter of Mars, which we know, and Tarzan, and that his sun-blackened skin was the Mercurian version of Tarzan's sun-bronzed skin. I mean, it was all very it was done very, very specifically. I mean, she was introduced to Burroughs through God of Mars when she was still in grade school, right? So I mean, she had devoured the John Carter stories.
That's not. I gotta say, that's not a series I would envision anybody reading nowadays during grade school.
Yeah, at the time it was. I mean, that was the highlight. You know, one of the high points of science fiction. You know, in the early 1920s. You know, that time frame.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not disparaging it. I'm saying that it's a lot more complex than kids that age would read nowadays. Usually.
Right, but keep in mind, she had written several plays by the age of 13 while she was in school. And she had been offered a partial college scholarship, which she had to turn down because she couldn't afford the rest of the tuition. So she just decided, I'm going to be a full-time writer. And that is what she did. She joined the Los Angeles Science Fiction Society with people like Ray Bradbury and Robert Heinlein as members. And she just started submitting stuff and went to work. And then when, since genre fiction would get bought more, but didn't, or sci-fi, pulp fiction, you could certainly sell more, but it didn't pay as much. She started writing mysteries. So like her first published novel was No Good for a Corpse. And that's how she got the job as writing the screenplays for like The Big Sleep, Rio Bravo, The Long Goodbye, which harkens back to a show we just did a couple weeks ago where we mentioned The Long Shalom, as well as The Empire Strikes Back. So she was not an average school child by any stretch of the imagination.
I took a bit of a side detour and tried and read her original Empire Strikes Back script, and it's interesting because I mean it was the first draft, right, and of course it got changed since then, but it was very, very enlightening just in terms of like how it progressed over after she handed it off, and what elements were core to it that she introduced, and she introduced a lot of the core elements that came in the final movie.
Nice.
Yeah,
and we were talking about how she clearly must have been studying in different fields while writing this. And I think that's also represented in the variety of cultures represented, as Stark is essentially doing the hex crawl from point to point. I loved how instead of just the ye old medieval village that you would normally find, you had some places that had beehive structure homes, and others had these woven upright tents, like triangular tents, and then some stonework houses. And I'm a sucker for the different lifestyles being represented.
Different cultures based on like geography and social stuff. Yeah, that was really neat. It made the world seem much more real and alive than everything is the same. The entire planet is like 1905, Sweden. Okay, well, that's an entire planet. Even on Earth in 1905, the entire world wasn't Sweden.
Well, and we don't really see like the fertile, belt of the planet in this book, at least.
That was like the equator, though. They had to go through the desert first, and they're still heading south to get to that area.
Yeah, and I imagine that's probably something that the other books may explore a little bit more, since Skegg is kind of the main introductory point for the Outworlders, and presumably that's also part of the first novel. And
the shipport, the
shipport, and that where the ships land, and then they also the whole water region that's only hinted at in this novel, which is another one of those kind of oddities. It's like these two characters come in, close to the end of the book, the Morn and I can't remember the lady's name, the Queen.
The lady.
And they're sort of like there, and they provide this sort of assistance, and then they're gone. Promised to be maybe revealed in a later interlude. But there's like hints of like this very different and diverse cultures throughout the world, and that's really neat too.
And the relationship between the two different species and the telepathic trust that they've built
A lot of telepathy. I think she used psychokinetics, through this, and I found that really interesting because I think when we did Hyro's Journey, this reminded me a little bit of that, which I think was published the same year, right around the same time frame, right in 1974, something like that.
I don't know,
And
Bob. Telepathic.
and you have
telepathic moose, telepathic dog things. Yeah,
exactly. It was sort of like in the air, that's the 70s, like let's explore ESP and Firestarter and all this kind of thing.
Well, yeah, it really was.
The same seminar.
You had Leonard Nimoy doing In Search of. It was Reader's Digest was doing Mysteries of the Unknown. That was really a big thing coming out of the 60s into the early 70s.
So,
heck, I think the CIA was probably just now winding down MK Ultra while still having men stare at goats. So I mean, there really was kind of the psychic phenomena thing in the air at the time.
But what a cool relationship with the Northhounds, and how that all plays out in the novels, and how tense she made it feel, especially when the battle with the Houndmaster, and then at the end when he has to face off with Gerd, for after it's like those are moments that just had me like, what's going to happen? I don't know.
It's never taken for granted, like other authors would do. Okay, well he forced them to submit, and now he is their master forever. Like, no, that's not how animals work. At the moment there's weakness, they're going to say, "Hey, I can take you."
So this is a like grand adventure and everything. Can we talk about the horror aspect? The runners.
Very cool.
Oh yeah.
These like skin like old leather and they are positively devastating and revolting. They just with stones and femurs and then teeth, but their own teeth, not their
the way they're described is running with like their arms out like stiff unflapping wings. And I wasn't sure if it was like, are they out to the side, or are they doing that whole like anime run with their arms back?
Well, they were doing it to keep balance. So
they're so creepy. And the fact that there's these rampaging hordes of like unthinking cannibals. And so what do we do? What does our hero do? He weaponizes them. Oh man, that was dark.
The small cell, the quote unquote family, including the one that was possibly woman holding something small to her chest, and it was an infant runner.
Oh.
Yeah, no, that was great. It's very. It's one of the things
reacting to this one.
Yeah. it is one of the things that you don't see in other works of this type. I mean, it's exploring, like you said, like the horror elements, in a way that, in the fact that he uses them in battle, like as a tactic, or that his allies decide to do that. It is very fun to see and a little bit creepy, like you said. I mean, there's a few moments of that creepiness. There's like the Ur when they go and discover like the breeding grounds of the Ur. It's sort of like hinted at in terms of like these slug-like creatures that are giving birth to these these sort of warriors,
like slugs with empty eyes. And those are the well-created servants.
Well, because what the Ur were birthing were very, very humanoid and almost perfect, but they all looked alike.
Right.
So, I mean, that should have been our warning right there, right? That there's a queen just popping out drones. But they were talking about, well, now that those are destroyed, there's just the males left.
Okay, so now that we've tackled one of the top things on my list of things to stat.
Why don't we move to things to stat? Yeah.
Well, before we leave the book, one thing I just wanted to say, I love a book with a map, and this has a great map, at the beginning of the book. My edition at least did. I don't know if you guys have, but it had a copy. I got a print copy that has a nice, double folded map, and I love that whenever I find that in one of these novels. So, anyways,
nice.
Pick up the print copy just for that.
Full props for maps. I'm a fan. It's less that someone else has to do down the line.
Indeed, indeed.
Bob, what about you? So, what you want to start us off with things that's sad?
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, right? The North Hounds, the titular Hounds of Skaith, right? I mean, they're telepathic,
things, yeah,
above animal intelligence, so they could communicate, but they were incredibly verbose. It's like kill, or all's red minds, kill. Yeah, because they were kind of fixated on killing, and their mental ability, the way they killed was normally not by fang and claw, but by literally using psychic powers to terrify things to death. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, in that scene that Jen mentions with the runner family, we only get the confirmation that it was a runner infant after all of them, including the infant, have been slain by the hound's mental abilities, which is both dark and terrifying.
They also play with their people, right?
They do.
They start tossing them around, as they're.
Oh yeah. They're like, okay, things are dead now. Then chomp, chomp, toss. They're
That's
very.
why this felt so much like Metamorphosis Alpha. I had that character.
That's fair.
Mental attack as the canine. Yeah, we could do this.
And really, right after the North House, the next thing I would stat would be the runners. Right? They're so adapted to their environment. They're so terrifying. I would probably, rather than doing them as a monster, though, I might do them as a Meta Magician's entry. Because at the end of the day, they're not greatly different from everyone else, other than they've developed certain traits. They move with the winds, but they're cannibals. But I mean, they're much like the others on the world. They've just adapted to the desert, and they're cannibals. They're described as being like piranha. So really, they're like flesh-eating locusts.
Yeah, I think that's when you have the monster, or maybe the Men and Magician stat entry that's number encountered 5D100 or something like that.
Yeah, because it can be anywhere from a family unit to a giant mass. I really enjoyed the Tarf, the four-armed bird things. In my brain, I see them as kind of pterodactylish. They don't really describe them all that much, other than the fact that they fly and they have 4 arms.
Is that what Kletlect was?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, he controlled them. They were the servants. The Tarf were the 4-armed guardians.
Oh, gotcha.
I think Kleklek is the one that he encounters in going up the stairs, and he's one of the Tarf, and I think the king is named as.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. I apologize. Yeah.
Kletlect was described as hairless, horned, 4 arms, each of those arms ending in 3 tentacular fingers. Yep.
Yeah, they're really creepy. They are immune.
Yeah.
They're immune to the mind bolts of the hounds. So, is it because they're immune to fear? Is it because their minds are so different? And they're a created race, right? I mean, they're what do they call them? A controlled mutation. Mm-hmm. Just like their masters are also a controlled mutation, but not as successful. And
the bird people.
Yep. And honestly, come on. They don't wield, they got 4 arms, but they're not wielding 4 swords. No. They're wielding 4-handed swords. I want to stab a 4-handed sword.
Is that like a single blade? Or is it 4?
Yeah, it's a 4-handed sword. A 2-handed sword is 2 hands. A 4-handed sword is a 4-handed sword, which would probably be a 2-handed sword for a giant, but still. So it gives you this absolute menacing feel for these things that are certainly far more intelligent than the hounds, right? I mean, they go into battle with these things, and they're like, okay, well, we'll stay a little bit longer, but if you're not coming with us, we're leaving. Those are the things that I was like, yeah, I gotta stat those. I gotta stat those. What about you, Marc?
Yeah, so I think that the controlled mutations, the other ones that were kind of glimpsed out in the book, or we got a lot more details on, were the Falarin, which are the bird creatures that become Stark's allies. And I love that they have this kind of ability to control the wind, right? And they even they call it, the term is the werewinds, right? Which I love that phrase, and just how they end up using it to like you said, they weaponize the runners by creating these sandstorms that, you know, envelop and then push them forward and sort of enclose them. And they use the winds to demoralize a siege as a siege attack, right? So they spend like 3 days pounding the city with winds without even, sending their troops in. And then once everything is devastated and the exhaustion is set in, that's when they send in, the ground troops. And so the Fairlin are like this really kind of cool thing that I think you could, whether it's a player character species or just like a monster, they have a lot of fun abilities. The other ones, like the children of the sea are mother, which is like these aquatic creatures. The children of Skaith, which are the under the mountain ones, that never come out or, have this kind of religious practice. The Susming, which is the Morn race, the ones that have the telepathic ability, that
Right.
so this kind of symbiotic relationship, it seems, with them. And then the Ur, just this, how they are, these kind of genetic clones, whether they're kind of like bat things or maybe they're this kind of like warrior creation. So all of those, I think, are kind of rich for some sort of statting up.
I gotta say, the Falaran are such a unique idea. It's not something I've read of before. That kind of hybrid mutation and that power.
Well, and they're sort of like
really impressive.
They're presented as imperfect, right? Because their species was designed or hopefully created to fly, but they only can fly imperfectly, and they sort of have this, they've developed this alternative way of powering themselves, with the supremacy over the wind, or with this kind of the remoteness and their, the kind of the
like a group power.
Yeah, that we'll get to my word of the day, but
Well, and
that like one of the things in there is that whole scene where they're like sort of rustling their wings and it's kind of creating this like noise of communication amongst themselves, which was really cool.
And they weren't just a controlled mutation; they were a mutation by request. They wanted to be given the gift of flight, and that's why when the first time Stark sees their wings, he's like, those wings will never carry them to high loft. And he says, our wings are imperfect.
Yeah.
They can glide, they can fly at low heights, but the rest of the time they're riding like everybody else.
Yeah, the other thing I was thinking would be kind of cool, because this is one thing we haven't really talked about, is that when you read the intro description, Jen, is that there's a galactic empire there, and that kind of hovers
kind of in the background.
It hovers over the whole narrative, because it's always referred. That's the objective, right? They want to get off planet. They want to take Ash. He has to rescue Ashton. He has to get Ashton back. They have to get off planet. They have to find the transceiver, or to communicate. They have to. And that whole aspect is like very interesting from a storytelling element. But I thought the really cool thing that from a campaign or like gaming element is the planet hoppers, because they are sort of this very Mutant Crawl classics, or like ancient technology that comes to life, and they use it in the battle. And I just love that idea of statting up a planet hopper that's part of whether it's like a Purple Planet setting or like a Mutant Crawl classic setting. It's this kind of like cool technology that that discoverable, maybe usable, maybe it has some things that go wrong with it, type thing. But yeah, that planet hoppers is the other thing I kind of really liked.
Magic carve Amphrodapir?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm stumbling.
You still got it.
Yep.
What about you, Jen?
I really dug the idea of the ritual of Hearthright, where a specific herb was essentially smudged across Stark's forehead, and the leader of these people says, I wish no harm to be done to you. If harm is done to you, may the same be done to me.
Oh, yeah.
You are welcome in my home and in my place. So I kind of like the idea of just maybe a small effect on that, like maybe the canticles. Maybe pairing that with one of our deities that hasn't been fully fleshed out yet. I'm surprised you didn't touch on statting out the game of marbles, essentially. Varicolored pebbles tossed onto a space marked out with intricate patterns drawn on the ground, or in the dust, as it were. And just because I have to hearken back to the Addercorn, there was a compressed lichen cake that was given to the livestock. And it just seemed to be a nectar, an ambrosia to them.
Mm-hmm.
But was it as addictive as Addercorn? Because Addercorn was creepy.
We don't know because the livestock weren't telepathic with Stark like the dogs were.
But boy, Addercorn is a big long callback to Sanctum Secorum episode number 1.
Well, you know, happy birthday, Mr. Beatty.
Yeah,
okay, I'm good.
But yeah, that ritualized hospitality.
Yeah. Yeah, that could just be like a minor, like the reverse of one of our curses, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then continue on, Jen. Let's move on to audio. Did you have any thoughts on audio?
Insert blank look here. Actually, what I typed out was ellipses. So next.
Mine is just one line above that. I only have one entry. And when I was reading the story, because there's so many kind of like, you know, parallels to, you know, Frank Herbert and, you know, some of the, you know, the Bedouin stuff, the soundtrack to Lawrence of Arabia, the movie came into my mind a lot, just because I think that would be kind of like a cool sort of like, you know, resonating theme, you know, to accompany, you know, a gaming session. It's not my favorite soundtrack, but it's also one of those things that's very iconic, you know, and it certainly evokes, you know, the same sort of like uprising and leading the you know, the tribesmen, you know, against the you know, the empire type thing that's going on in the John Stark novel, or the Eric Stark novel. So,
well, I will certainly agree with you on soundtracks being a really good choice. Now I will admit, you know, one of my first thoughts is kind of a cheat, which was the soundtrack to John Carter, right, by Michael Giacchino. But it has that sort of sweeping epic feel, which you also find in the Lawrence of Arabia soundtrack, right? It's got the huge swelling instrumentals. It conveys, you know, the flowing dunes and the strange places. And then I started looking at some others by Michael Giacchino, like Jupiter Rising or Wharf the Planet of the Apes, are also really great. I mean, the guy's done soundtracks for everything. He's done, I mean, he did Werewolf by Night. I mean, he's done, you know, Star Trek Beyond. He's done everything. but those 3 soundtracks specifically I thought were a really good choice. But in trying to find something more specific, it was really difficult because Leigh Brackett, while an important author and very influential, doesn't really have the same name recognition as like Robert E. Howard or Lovecraft. There's not bands out there dedicated to churning out music based on the works of Leigh Brackett. But I did find a group called Electric Wizard. They're a death metal band out of the UK. And their first 3 albums are all considered like genre-defining albums in death metal. And their 3rd album was called Let Us Pray. And in that, they have in the liner notes, there's lyrical inspirations. And it's Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, Leigh Brackett, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and there's a few others on the list, but they specifically cite her as an inspiration to the lyrics for the album. Nice. So between Lawrence of Arabia and what I put together, we have a Spotify list that's about 5.5 hours of music. Now, granted, it starts with Electric Wizard, which is very, very different from everything else on the list. So you don't want. I wouldn't put this list on shuffle if I were you.
Are you kidding? It's the best kind.
I'll add a few more desert themed ones that I just thought of. Like Carl Sanders has a pretty good, like, you know, sort of Pyro, I think is maybe the album, which is really good. And the Hans Zimmer New Dune soundtrack is very, you know, very kind of in that element too. But again, you know, very focused on the desert. There's so much more to this planet, you know, obviously.
Yeah, no, most certainly. It's just there's a lot of music that can easily accompany this. There's not There's just not as much music with a direct link,
Right.
As opposed to like, Conan or some of the other things. So, okay, well, if you could only come up with one soundtrack at the time, Marc, say redeem yourself with your word, which oddly enough is singular, with your word of the day, which I'm betting is going to be plural.
Well, I always try to, like, go through and find a few words, and then I get my top choice. And it goes back to what we were talking about with that scene where he's encountering the Falarin, and there's this rustling that he hears, and the way that Leigh Brackett describes it is use the word susurration, which is a lovely word. And just one of those things that you read and it's like, oh, I can understand what that means. It's that kind of whispering, sort of like raspy, sound.
It's an onomatopoeia.
Yeah, and it's and just seeing that in print, I was like, oh, that's I instantly knew that was the word I wanted to bring up. But there's the werewinds was another one that I just like love seeing in print, and love seeing that sort of combination of like new terminology that's when you join words like that. And it's so evocative when they use it for the runners, and use it in description of the battle of the city. So that's another one I would just say that she created, obviously, or maybe had maybe some association with, but it's a created word that I really like. I also was interested, like Skaith, itself is means to harm or to injure, and I think that's just kind of interesting, sort of etymology, just going back whether she intentionally used that or not. It's kind of an alternate spelling of it, Skaith, CH or SCATHE is kind of a more common one.
Considering one of the lesser tribes was known as harm, that is interesting.
Yeah. But Leigh Brackett really had some beautiful turns of phrases, even if her vocabulary was not like as dense as like Jack Vance or things like that. But like one of the phrases that came out to me was like when she's describing, I think it was one of the, I can't remember if it wasn't Eric Stark that he was describing with it, but it was like when he smiled, he was handsome as a sword is handsome, which is like this kind of like it's a very sort of like, for me, evocative way of phrasing that. It's not
stern almost.
Yeah, and I just love that kind of like she had multiple of those kind of comparisons. So yeah, but I think the lovely sort of like use of these kind of like diamonds of words, like like susurration was just one of those that leapt out to me, and I thought was one I wanted to
actually had to look up. I flagged just in case you hadn't, and that was dite.
Yeah, dite was another one I listed, and it was kind of like, what is she meaning here? Because it was like they did not dite to prepare for the coming war or something like that, right? And
they hadn't equipped.
Oh, right, yeah. So they hadn't gotten ready because they were like reveling, right?
Or equipped.
Yeah. So they were basically like trying to, they weren't taking it seriously because they were in a party mood.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, her use of language is wonderful.
Yeah. Well, that takes us, I think,
to a breezier read. Yeah.
Very easy to read. So, I guess our next segment, existing inspirations and reskins. I think that Jen, you wanted to highlight a couple here that I don't think Bob or I had thought of.
There's a couple that kind of tie in both on the same note. The first two are from our newest setting, The Dying Earth, of course. Penumbra of the Polar Ape by Harley Stroh, and Pilgrims of the Black Obelisk by some guy named Marc, by Marc and Julian. They're both very heavily based on the pilgrimage. There's some really great tones in there that could tie in perfectly with this book. The other side of Penumbra is that you're essentially Stark. You're on this rock that you're not familiar with, and you're just trying to get back home. But you also encounter the situations with the pilgrims, and it's the total hex crawl, really, for literal purposes. Once you get through that, you'll understand. The other two that I tagged were Beyond the Black Gate and The One Who Watches from Below, because those are the two that I can find off the top of my head that have hounds that have anything remotely similar to these capabilities as the Northhounds. And I believe Beyond the Black Gate even ties them into the invoke patron spell that you get with shoot, Bob, help, Beyond the Black Gate, your new NPC.
Oh, the Master of the Wild Hunt.
Thank you. The hounds are actually tied in with the invoke patron spell for that, which kind of helps. But the one who watches from below contains some hounds that also have a couple special abilities that you could very easily tweak if you're looking for a something you don't have to do yourself for those stats. And I know you guys have some really interesting ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've alluded to, that there's a lot of Purple Planet, just in the setting, that you could easily reskin the Purple Planet to be Skaith. I think there's very much like you could take many of the adventures that are located there. The Kith are sort of like a race that, you could, transport to some of the tribes that are there, or some of the, more like warlike creatures that are sort of, part of Skaith. There's also like 3 mini, smaller adventures that are part of Purple Planet that people may not be as familiar with. The Rock Awakens, the Synthetic Swordsmen of the Purple Planet, and the Sky Masters of the Purple Planet. The Synthetic Swordsman, I think, actually has like a sort of a climate theme to it, right? Which has this, idea that there's like some sort of climate generating device at the north, far north of the world, and it's gone, dormant, and you have to kind of like, react to that. And so that's kind of a cool tie into the climate themes of this. Neon Nights, which is kind of a Purple Planet in disguise, right? That's one of these things that it's very much a, doesn't start you there, but it gets you there, sort of adventure. So I think that's another one that's
especially the way it starts. You're essentially fighting these identical
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I think there's like a lot of that you could just like, take and just pluck and put right in the setting. We talked about Dying Earth. I think there's a lot of, just basic you could do there. The two I thought that came to mind because they're just more adjacent. The Crawljammer zine that was published by Tim Callahan for a few issues. There's a psionic knight class that has like a psionic table, that's really kind of cool, and it's a way of introducing psionics into DCC. One of the first, attempts to do that. I think there's been subsequent ones, but that psionic knight class is kind of like a Hyro, type character, but you could easily make it, something that's part of like, Eric Stark's, capabilities, especially with his, abilities to communicate and work with the hounds. The other one that really came to mind was James McGeorge's Black Sun Death Crawl, which is so
it because
much
of the dead baby.
It's so much like that horror theme, and like crawling underground, the dying planet, this sort of like timetable. If any of our viewers have not, picked up that, it was a beautiful, short zine or short, product that really got a lot of deserved attention, several years back. But it's just really great as an evocative setting, and it fits into that horror themes you're talking about, Jen.
Black Sun Death Crawl, Black Sun Death Crawl, Black Sun Death Crawl.
Dead babies do a D3 damage.
It is the darkest adventure ever written, I think, for quite possibly any game system. But it is so often imitated, never duplicated. It is a phenomenal.
Here you go.
Yeah. You really want to get your hands on.
All right. I don't know. We gave Bob too much time to think about it. He started on his list. This ain't fair.
So first of all, I think you could take Doom of the Savage Kings, and you could replace the beast with a Northhound.
Oh yeah.
And that adds another level of danger, because now it's a little bit more intelligent, and it has that ability to kind of wipe out the zeros that get in its way. Exactly. For psionics, of course, Reed Sanfilippo and Shield of Faith Studios released Mind Games, their version of psionics, certainly worth looking at.
That's what that is. Okay.
But I think that it would be very easy to tie this into Mutant Crawl Classics, right? Yeah. Dealing with mutations, both controlled and otherwise, in kind of a broad sense. And as you mentioned, there's so much of the technology from the outer worlds could certainly be artifacts of the ancients if you were running it that way. But I really like the idea of tying this in and using Starcrawl. Because I mean the whole point is there's this massive galactic empire. They've got all this technology. We're not seeing it here, and it's just because they're not bringing it planet side. Right? This is a planet that never achieved space flight. They're dwindling down, and they're certainly willing to trade for just metal. Right? So of course you're not going to arm the local populace. So that gives you an opportunity to take a kind of high tech group of characters and drop them into a very low tech setting and make the players get by more on their wits than powerful items and lasers and things of that nature.
Yeah, and it really ties into a lot of storytelling elements that are part of the book, where people don't believe that anybody comes from the off-world, that Skaith is the only place in the universe that isn't inhabited, or their concept of the universe. And so a lot of that kind of like, role playing of what do the NPCs even think of, people who come and tell them they come from beyond the stars. They must be mad.
And actually we're reminded in the shout box that mind games wasn't even really so much redone as just like reimagined and expanded on for the book Umerica Unnatural, which is an entire source book for Umerica as opposed to the smaller zine. It's a really good call there. A fantastic book. And then finally there's an adventure, and it kills me because it's unpublished, but it's so deserving of the praise, is Fatagan on the Purple Planet by Scott McKinley. Scott ran it at GaryCon 2022, and it was by far and away my favorite adventure of the con, and quite possibly the year. And I ran stuff that I wrote. So I'm just saying, because it's this broad, sweeping epic set on the Purple Planet where you're the outsider. So you're from the standard DCC world. You're taken to the Purple Planet, and now it is raising the forces, stopping this unstoppable foe, and this grand sweeping military epic that you can play in a 4-hour session if you're lucky. Hunt Scott McKinley down and make him run it for you. That is what I'm going to say. You will not regret it. Fatagan on the Purple Planet.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna copy and paste that for everybody. That way they know exactly who I'm down.
Yeah, he's just lucky I'm not posting his Facebook account into the chat stream right now.
Now.
I'll do what it takes. I want to buy a copy of that adventure.
Fair.
Well, I think that brings us to our DCC feature for the show. The other thing that we wanted to highlight, MCC number 5, Blessings of the Vile Brotherhood by Harley Stroh. Bob, do you want to give us a little bit of a synopsis here?
When your tribe's prized possession, a functioning Metabot, finally breaks down, your seeker team is given a holy quest. Take the dead bot on a long and perilous journey to the monks of the Holy Medicinal Order in hopes that their shamans can repair it. But the monks are not as the legends portray. There's definitely something dark and dangerous going on in the Holy Monastery. Blessings of the Vile Brotherhood takes PCs into the foreboding mountains that ring the hothouse jungles of the post-apocalypse. The PC's quest leads them along the Pilgrim's Way, an ancient sacred path in search of the Holy Medicinal Brotherhood. There, amidst the high peak shrouded in gray rad snow, dread bots fighting a long-forgotten war, and the perverted beasts that have sought shelter in the wilderness, the PCs discover the truth of the Holy Order and its bloody fate. Yeah.
I'll admit this was a toss-up. This was a toss-up between Dying Earth and MCC. I leaned on MCC because we've pretty much trod Dying Earth a lot lately.
Yeah. Well, this is great because this is the first time I actually read this adventure. I hadn't, I have the MCC books and all that things, but I never dived into this one. It's a great adventure. I mean, of course it's Harley Stroh. It's going to be, very solid, but he has some really interesting mechanics for the kind of the hex crawl side of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you have kind of free reign to go different directions. So he gives the judges guidance on, okay, if they do this, then here's kind of the consequences. And the fun thing is the mechanic really builds off of the PC's choices, in a way that they are being hunted by this, ancient artifact. It's blind. It has this sort of like limitations that are, very fun to you use as a device. But it has this kind of really interesting sort of search mechanic and like hunting and seeking and sending out its drones. And I thought that part was just great, just that, how he came up with that. Certainly
like
though,
metallic runners.
Yeah, but certainly like it does tie in thematically with like this, theocracy, that has been built up and been kind of similar to Skaith, where, this order of monks is, somewhat revered and by people as far as like providing succor and sustenance, but it's got this dark side too, right? In terms of like that's something PCs can discover, and so I think it's a great sort of tie-in for the themes, and just the fact that it has like mutant crawl classics all over it, which is really cool.
And especially Pilgrim's Way, that was kind of the deciding factor on that one, at least in my mind. Honestly, I hadn't read this one for probably 6 years. I remember play testing it right before it went out for publication, like 2017 or something. Does that sound right?
Yeah,
Somewhere
I think
in there.
so.
Somewhere in there. Yeah, and I mean, one of the NPCs could easily be the guy that Stark is looking for at the very end and finally finds.
Pedorlon or something like that.
Peladon, yeah.
Peladon, yeah, I can't remember.
Peladron, yeah. I'm not going to open the book now. But it takes the entirety of the story to find him and find the transceiver and get all of that. Peladron's, I know I'm getting the name wrong, but his demeanor could so easily be that of Brother Lecho, one of the primary NPCs in there. Although
yeah, he had
it depends, because there's actually it depends on where you encounter him and what kind of mood he's in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's the Mad Brother Lecho is maybe how it's referred to.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah, Bob, what were your thoughts?
Well, my biggest thing is this adventure right off the bat begins with the PCs having nightmares, right? Which are kind of foreshadowing things to come. So it struck me as very akin to Gareth's visions. And so you could easily, rather than nightmares, which anyone who's played in any of my like Mountain Monsters games will tell you, I'm a huge fan of giving PCs nightmares. But you could instead use a seer to give them those visions, and maybe not all at once. Maybe there's a seer traveling with them and giving them these little bits, much like was happening with Eric Stark. Well, I see something, something accepting you. I see a dagger, but it's not a good thing. Giving them those little bits of feel really, I think, would tie into this nicely. The adventure itself is really good. The whole Canticle for Leibowitz feel to it is, I mean, it's a great book. It's definitely more Canticle for Leibowitz than Saint Leibowitz and the Wild Horsewoman, right? I think Marc, you'll agree with me on that, right? It is
yeah.
more the former rather than the latter. But overall, it has sort of that same. It has a very similar feel, but almost like you're following in the wake of Eric Stark, right? I mean, when you get to the monastery, it's like you're arriving at the city that was laid siege to after Stark has left.
You're just a tick behind, yeah.
Yeah, and so you're dealing with the aftermath. But unlike Stark, you liked the people that were in there, and maybe don't like the people that were going against them. But overall, it's a tight little adventure with some great little twists and turns. And depending, like you said, depending on where you encounter an NPC, depending on how you handle certain things, your experience can be very different with it. And that's something that as a judge, I always appreciate. I like being able to run an adventure, multiple times for multiple groups. It's their first experience no matter what, right? But it's my second or third or fourth. And so when I'm playing something that can turn out very differently based on what the players want to do, I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah.
I will say it's a level 4 module for MCC, so it is definitely higher level than most of the things you will come across for MCC. And I kind of feel like it's not gotten a whole lot of oomph since that initial MCC Kickstarter. It's not one of the ones that people always talk about. I don't know why it's got such a
just the cover alone,
bizarre driven cover, right?
Right.
It does suffer from that sort of like inattention because of high levels, right? There's just not as many people experience with that, but it's definitely one of those that you could even, just take it and make it into a straight like first or second level adventure with some minor modifications as well. And I think that if you wanted to like take your group that may be a little lower level and just tweak it, because it's well worth it.
That's it. I'm going to start stocking things at conventions alphabetically by author.
Hey, Marc, we're in the B's.
Which means you're behind everyone at the top. At least the first day. The second day we got to rotate.
Yeah, but Julian's a BE, so he'll be all the way at the back.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll at least be in front of Julian.
Oh, brother. Okay.
Well, I think that takes it for our show, tonight. And I'll just take us out, with some parting words. That as a reminder, we've relaunched the Sanctum Secorum Companion as a Sanctum Secorum Quarterly. Our first issue is massive and includes new monsters and magic, reviews, rules discussion, comics, and even an adventure. And as always, it's available for free on DriveThruRPG. Plus, we are always looking for more content and contributors. The next quarterly is coming up, and if you are interested, please reach out. We would love to have your vision in that publication. If you're interested in joining the team for the long haul or simply have something to contribute for a single issue, drop us a line at the hub at sanctum.media. We'd love to see what sort of things you have been creating. In the meantime, be sure to check out our new releases from Ugandan author Ashraf Brandon, the Kakwando, the Lukwada, and the Bashwazi, if I'm saying that right. All of them are available on drivethrurpg.com and are only $1 each. And we'll put links to those in our show notes and on the website. And watch for the next release coming very soon. Bob, do you have any knowledge of what that is coming up?
Oh, yeah. So how about a cult of cannibalistic witches who are, among other things, known as the Night Dancers.
And
awesome.
Pronunciation guides again, right?
Yes, it is. We just got the cover art for it yesterday, so it'll be coming out in a few days. It is another just delightfully creepy piece of Ugandan folklore.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Proceeds from that go to Ashraf.
All the proceeds go, all of Sanctum's proceeds, because DriveThru still gets their cut. But all Sanctum proceeds, including the affiliate proceeds, go directly to Ashraf.
Yeah, that's great. And they're also just $1, so they're very low cost for some really quality material. If you're enjoying the show, please comment on the podcast or help us by posting a review on iTunes or whatever podcatcher of choice you may have. And now we are on YouTube or DriveThruRPG for you zine fans. Those ratings and reviews help new listeners find the podcast and the community. And next month, join us when we discuss a return to Dying Earth for Kugel the Clever. So it's good that we saved the Dying Earth until next month.
There is
There
a
we go.
reason that Dying Earth wasn't a feature. Yeah, we
There
just
we
can't do Dying Earth, Dying Earth, Dying Earth all the time.
Yeah.
Well, we
Yeah.
could. I mean, that's what we did for several years, but of our actual lives. But,
No.
Yeah, and definitely take a look at our if you don't have it, I think, can they get a bookmark off the website as well in terms of our season upcoming
right
reading?
now they need to find us for bookmarks, but I will I think the list has been posted and we'll get it reposted.
And you know where to find somebody at UK Games Expo next week.
Nice.
Yes, Sanctum will have swag at UK Game Expo. How cool is that?
That's
Seriously,
awesome.
how cool is that?
We're really covering some really interesting works and authors that are, part of the celebration of the third season, and so some really exciting upcoming topics that we'll be discussing. Well, any last thoughts, Bob or Jen?
Thanks for your patience at the beginning. Sorry for the rough start, and I have to apologize ahead of time. Spellburn was scheduled for tomorrow night, but the Dark Master is preempted. So we'll catch you next month.
Yeah, I will also thank everyone for their patience. It's never good when your power company comes out and when the lights come back on, they're like, yeah, we don't know how you had power to begin with. Your ground wire was fried all the way through. Everything else charred. We got it fixed though. So we shouldn't have had power, or you could have been on fire. It's fixed now, right? It's fixed now. You're all good. So thank you for your patience on that. But also, I'm a massive fan of Leigh Brackett, and I encourage anyone that hasn't read her stuff or hasn't read it in a while. There's a number of omnibus collections out there. Pick it up and start reading it. She was a phenomenal author for her time. She's a phenomenal author today. So definitely pick up her stuff. And other than that, be inspired.